History is a story where the winners hold the pen. One of Rome's greatest rivals was so thoroughly erased, its very name was scraped from the stone. By the end of this journey, you will see the ancient map of power redrawn before your eyes. How does an entire empire vanish from our memory, and what desperate clues did it leave behind in its silence? What does it mean for us when only one side of a story survives? How much of what we know about the past is simply the echo of a conqueror's voice? A palimpsest is a manuscript page scraped clean to be written on again, but traces of the old words often bleed through. History can work the same way. For centuries, the story of Rome's rise has been the dominant text, but if you look closely at its margins, you see the ghost of another narrative. In the official Roman histories, there is a conspicuous and curious silence. When powerful neighbors are mentioned, like those to the east across the Adriatic Sea, the language is dismissive and vague. The great historian Livy might call them brigands. Polybius refers to them with broad regional labels. They are never granted the dignity of their own name as a unified people or a sovereign state. This is not an accident. According to historian Dr. Elena Marchetti, this pattern mirrors a Roman practice known as damnatio memoriae, a condemnation of memory. This was a punishment usually reserved for individual traitors or disgraced emperors, whose names and images were systematically chiseled off monuments. But in this case, Dr. Marchetti argues, it appears to have been applied on a breathtaking scale to an entire nation, a rival kingdom. The goal was not just to defeat them, but to unmake them in the story of the past. Yet the erased text always bleeds through. Clues surface in unexpected places. Archaeologists find high-quality silver and distinctive pottery in Roman markets that have no clear Roman, Greek, or Etruscan origin. In records of Senate debates, there are uneasy references to Eastern kings who command respect and pose a legitimate threat. Most tellingly, across the rugged landscapes of the eastern Adriatic coast, the stone foundations of cities, fortresses, and harbors tell of a complex, centralized society that does not fit the Roman portrayal of scattered, primitive tribes. Someone was here, building in stone and trading across the sea, someone powerful enough that Rome felt it necessary not only to conquer them, but to erase them. To understand who they were, we must first look to the land they called home, a strategic corridor of mountain and coast that held the keys to the ancient world. Their homeland was a natural fortress of breathtaking contradiction. To the west, the deep blue of the Adriatic and Ionian seas offered endless coves and harbors. To the east, the stark, cloud-piercing Dinaric Alps created an impenetrable shield. Between these two worlds lay a narrow strip of incredible potential fertile river plains like the Drin, lush valleys, and rolling hills rich with timber and ore. This was not some isolated corner of the map. It was the ancient world's most vital intersection. Picture the Amber Road, a highway of commerce bringing golden Baltic amber down from the north, meeting here with maritime routes carrying spices, silks, and ideas from the eastern Mediterranean. Whoever controlled this corridor controlled the flow of wealth between continents. The people who first mastered this landscape were known collectively as the Illyrian tribes, a mosaic of fiercely independent clans, each with its own chieftain and customs. They were renowned as skilled sailors and formidable highland warriors. But in the 3rd century before the Common Era, something extraordinary happened. These disparate tribes began to unite under a single, powerful monarchy. Think of it like the 13 American colonies, each with its own identity and government, eventually joining together to form a new and stronger federal state. This was the birth of a true kingdom, a political and military force that could project power far beyond its mountain passes. The evidence of their sophistication is etched in stone. At the city of Bailes, you can still walk alongside Cyclopean walls, massive blocks fitted together without mortar, a testament to both engineering skill and a constant need for defense. At Apollonia, a colony founded jointly with the Greeks, the orderly grid of streets, the grand agora, and the finely built theater speak of a society engaged in complex urban life, trade, and culture. This was no loose confederation of pirates. This was a civilization with the resources, organization, and ambition to build for the ages. Their geography provided the wealth and the defensive strength to dream of empire, but it would take a singular individual to turn that dream into a reality that would make Rome itself take notice. In a dusty corner of a museum storage room, a stone face stares out with empty eyes. The marble bust is finely carved, the bearing regal, but across its base the stone is scarred and raw. Someone has taken a chisel and painstakingly scraped away the inscription, leaving only ghostly grooves where a name should be. This act of deliberate defacement is our second clue. It speaks of a targeted campaign not just to defeat a king, but to obliterate his very identity from memory. The defaced bust might represent King Balaios, a monarch known only from his coins, or perhaps it is King Agron, the architect of the kingdom's golden age. Their names survive in fragments, whispered by history against a roaring tide of silence. In the 3rd century before the Common Era, King Agron of the Ardean tribe transformed a coalition of highland clans into the most formidable power in the Adriatic. His capital at Skodra, modern-day Skodra in Albania, was a vibrant center. Imagine a fortified city buzzing with activity, where merchants from Greece and Italy bartered in the markets, where envoys from distant lands sought audience, and where the spoils of a growing empire were displayed with pride. This was no rustic chieftain's stronghold. It was the seat of a strategic mind who understood that true power rested on 2 pillars, the sea and the mountains. The Greek historian Polybius, writing to explain Rome's rise to a Greek audience, provides our most detailed, though biased, account. Even he had to concede the kingdom's strength. He wrote of King Agron that his army and fleet were more formidable than any in the region's recent history. This was not empty praise. Their power was built on unique and terrifyingly effective military innovations. At sea, they ruled with the Lembus, a swift, lightweight warship. Unlike the heavy, multi-banked galleys of the Mediterranean powers, the Lembus was agile and fast, perfect for the Adriatic's narrow straits and sudden storms. It could appear from a hidden cove, strike a merchant convoy, and vanish before a heavier fleet could respond. On land, their strength was the mountain infantry, warriors who moved through their native highlands with effortless speed. They mastered the art of the ambush, using javelins and curved swords to harry slower, disciplined formations before melting back into the rocky landscape. This was guerrilla warfare centuries before the term existed, but this military machine was not built merely to guard mountain passes. It was the engine of an expansionist kingdom with a clear vision. King Agron and his successors began to project their power outward, bringing key Greek coastal cities like Epidamnus under their influence or control. They challenged the trade networks of the Greek leagues and began to intercept shipping that Rome, now a growing power across the water, considered its own. The Adriatic was becoming their lake, and the wealth flowing across it was filling their coffers. This assertive policy was a direct challenge to the established order, a declaration that a new player had arrived on the geopolitical stage and would not be ignored. The stage was now set for a collision between 2 rising empires, one on the Italian peninsula and the other here, in the land between the mountains and the sea. The spark that would ignite this conflict, however, would not come from a king but from a queen. The Roman merchant ship Fide sailed with a sense of entitlement, its hold carrying more than just amphorae of wine. On board was a Roman envoy, a diplomat on a mission to the city of Issa, a community that had recently sworn its loyalty to the kingdom based in Skodra. When swift Lembi warships intercepted the Fides, the Romans cried piracy, but from the perspective of Queen Teuta, who now ruled following King Agron's passing, this was no act of banditry. It was a sovereign state enforcing its borders and its political will. The seizure was a message, clear and deliberate. Foreign diplomats could not simply sail into what they considered their sphere of influence without permission. This single incident reveals the true spark of the conflict. It was never merely about robbery on the high seas. It was a clash over principle, over who had the right to control trade routes and dictate terms to the cities along the Adriatic coast. Rome's response was framed as a noble campaign to rid the sea of lawless pirates, a convenient narrative that painted them as the civilized restorers of order. But look closer at the events of the First Illyrian War, which began in 229 BCE. This was not a police action. It was the first major military expedition Rome ever launched across the Adriatic Sea, eastward into the Greek world. For the first time, Roman legions deployed outside the Italian peninsula not for defense, but to project power and rearrange the political landscape of a foreign region. This was a definitive, ambitious step on the path to empire. Visualize a map of the kingdom at its zenith. Their influence stretched down the coast, encompassing vital ports like Epidamnus, a major trading hub, and the fortified island of Pharos. Control of these points meant control of the sea lanes and, consequently, the wealth that flowed along them. When Roman consuls arrived with a massive fleet and army, they found a formidable adversary, but one facing internal challenges following Agron's death. The war concluded not with the utter destruction of the kingdom, but with a calculated treaty. Rome imposed strict terms, limiting the number and range of their warships, effectively forbidding them from sailing south of a certain point. It was a leash designed to cripple their naval power and thus their economic and political reach. The message from Rome was clear: you may continue to exist, but only as a neutered local power, not as a rival empire. This humiliating peace was meant to be the final word, but the spirit of a people who had so recently tasted regional dominance is not so easily subdued. The leash, drawn tight by Rome, would soon be met with a fierce and defiant pull, setting the stage for a ruler who would become a legend of resistance. The council in Skodra awaited their new ruler's words, expecting a period of mourning and retreat. Queen Teuta gave them neither. She stood before them not as a grieving widow, but as a sovereign, her declaration echoing a simple, unwavering principle. The kingdom her husband Agron built would not recede. It would endure. To understand Teuta, we must strip away the Roman propaganda that paints her solely as a bloodthirsty pirate queen. This was a leader facing an immense political challenge. The kingdom was a coalition of fiercely independent tribes and newly acquired Greek cities, held together by Agron's strength and charisma. Teuta's first task was to hold this fragile alliance together, to prove that a woman could wield the scepter with the same authority as a man. Her strategy for doing so was not random violence, but a calculated effort to secure the kingdom's lifeblood, its economic independence. By asserting control over the Adriatic trade routes, she ensured wealth continued to flow to her coastal cities and mountain fortresses, binding her subjects through shared prosperity. This policy, however, was a direct challenge to Rome, which viewed the entire sea as a corridor for its own expanding interests. The flashpoint came with the Roman ambassadors. After the seizure of the merchant ship Fides, Rome sent envoys to demand reparations and an end to what they called piracy. The ancient historian Appian records what happened next. He writes that Teuta, deeply offended by the ambassadors' haughty tone, ordered their deaths. In Rome's telling, this was the ultimate treachery, a violation of the sacred law of nations. But consider another interpretation from a modern lens. As a head of state, Teuta may have seen this not as murder, but as a severe but legitimate act of statecraft. The ambassadors had come not to negotiate but to dictate terms to a sovereign power. Their elimination was a brutal, unequivocal statement. We are not your subjects. We will not be lectured in our own hall. It was a gambit, a high-stakes assertion of her realm's right to exist on equal footing with Rome. The Roman response was swift and overwhelming. A second, even larger fleet descended upon the coast. Facing this immense force and perhaps internal pressures, Teuta fought a determined campaign but was ultimately besieged in her stronghold. Her surrender came with a harsh treaty, even more restrictive than the last, stripping away nearly all naval power. Yet to view this as a simple defeat misses the larger picture. Teuta had held the kingdom together against the greatest military power of the age for years. She had forced Rome to commit vast resources to subdue her, and most importantly, she cemented a legacy of defiance that refused to equate strength with gender. Though she fades from the historical record after her surrender, the spirit of resistance she embodied did not dissipate. It found a new vessel, waiting in the wings for its moment to challenge Rome once more. Skodra gleamed with a defiant wealth. Silver from inland mines paid for fine Greek pottery and ornate jewelry, while the harbor bustled with ships Gentius had rebuilt in secret, defying the old treaties. Into this revitalized capital came envoys from a distant king, Perseus of Macedon. Their proposition placed a weighty choice into Gentius's hands. The massive Third Macedonian War was brewing, a final, titanic clash between the Hellenistic world and the Roman Republic. Perseus offered an alliance, gold, and a shared dream, a world where power was not held by one dominant republic, but shared among several kingdoms. For Gentius, this was the ultimate strategic crossroads. Was aligning with Macedon a desperate last roll of the dice for a cornered kingdom? Or was it a visionary, if risky, bid to preserve a balance of power, to ensure his realm was not forever in the shadow of a single, overwhelming empire? The promise was intoxicating, a chance to leap from regional power broker to a key player on the world stage. He accepted, minting coins to celebrate the pact and mobilizing his forces. For a brief, shining moment, the kingdom stood at its zenith, its sovereignty recognized by a major power, its future intertwined with the fate of the entire eastern Mediterranean. The synchronization of events was precise and damning. As King Perseus and the Roman legions maneuvered for a decisive battle in Greece, Gentius moved to secure his own flank, engaging Roman allies along the coast. He likely believed the war would be long, that the Roman focus would remain divided. He was tragically mistaken. The Roman Senate, infuriated by this resurgence of a supposedly pacified foe, dispatched not a sprawling army, but a surgical strike force under a relatively new commander, Lucius Anicius Gallus. What followed was a masterclass in overwhelming, rapid Roman warfare. Gallus moved with shocking speed, bypassing mountain strongholds and striking directly at the heart. He captured key coastal cities with ease, then turned inland toward the capital. The defense of Skodra, the symbol of Illyrian power for generations, was fierce but ultimately hopeless. Besieged and with his Macedonian allies reeling from their own catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Pydna, Gentius's resistance collapsed. The war that had promised a new world order was over in a matter of weeks. The final act was a Roman ritual designed to erase dignity and signify total conquest. King Gentius, the last monarch of his line, was taken in chains to Rome. There he was paraded through the streets in the triumphal procession of Lucius Anicius Gallus, a living trophy amidst the plundered treasures of his own palace. After the triumph, he was not executed but placed into a form of quiet, comfortable exile in an Italian town, a king without a kingdom, a man forced to live out his days as a permanent reminder of Roman mercy and Roman power. His state was formally dissolved, its territory carved up and absorbed. The vibrant, defiant entity that had challenged Rome for over a century was, in the eyes of the law and the history books, extinguished. But as the dust settled on the battlefield and the last echoes of the triumph faded, a deeper, more subtle conflict began. With the king gone and the army disbanded, what became of the people, their language, their gods, and their memory? The political entity was dead, but the culture that fueled it now faced a far more complex and enduring challenge. The conquest was complete, but the true work of forgetting was just beginning. Rome understood that to truly secure a territory, you had to conquer its past as well as its present. This was not the random violence of a sacked city, but a cold, administrative process we might call the Erasure Protocol. First, the symbols of independent sovereignty had to be physically liquidated. In Skodra, the royal archives and libraries, the repositories of laws, treaties, and royal lineages, were deliberately targeted and burned. This was a calculated attack on memory itself, ensuring no official history from the kingdom's own perspective could survive. Simultaneously, a quieter campaign unfolded in the economy. The silver coins bearing the portraits of kings like Balaos or Gentius were gathered up, melted in furnaces, and restruck as anonymous Roman denarii or provincial issues featuring the faces of emperors and Roman gods. It was a financial reset, erasing the economic autobiography of a nation. Perhaps the most psychologically effective tool was renaming. Cities and landmarks that had carried local meaning for centuries received new Latin identities. This practice severed the intimate connection between a people and their geography, making the landscape itself feel foreign, owned by the new power. But the most profound strategy was cultural supplantation. This went beyond mere destruction. It was a deliberate overwriting. The Romans wouldn't just tear down a temple to a local deity. They would build their own temple to Jupiter or Mars directly on top of the sacred foundation, using the very stones of the old sanctuary in the new construction. Imagine a specific site, perhaps a hilltop sanctuary dedicated to Medorus, a horseman god revered as a protector. Following the conquest, that sanctuary is carefully dismantled. The carved blocks depicting local symbols are turned inward, hidden in the new foundation, while on the newly leveled surface rises a clean, classical temple to the Roman god Mars. The message was unmistakable and brutal. Your god is not destroyed. He is merely a lesser version of ours, and his home is now ours. Archaeologists refer to this evidence as the Archaeology of Absence. As Dr. Liam Vance notes, we are often looking for what is not there, the telling gaps in the sequence. A layer of ash and burned material where a palace archive should be, a sudden cessation in a unique style of pottery, a sacred spring that is abruptly covered by a Roman bath complex. This was not haphazard vandalism, it was a policy. The goal was to create a clean slate, to so thoroughly intertwine the new Roman identity with the land that the previous layers of culture became inaccessible, even to the descendants of the people who created it. They were to become a people without a past, or rather, with a past that now began with the arrival of Rome. Yet, even the most meticulous protocol can leave traces, and the most determined silence can be broken by something as small and persistent as a single word, etched in a forgotten script. A delicate bronze brooch known as the Albanian fibula sits in a museum case. Its surface is not smooth, but carefully inscribed with a line of symbols that look familiar, yet stubbornly refuse to reveal their secret. This is the tangible silence of a lost language. The inscription is one of the very few direct pieces of evidence we have for the Illyrian language, and it remains undeciphered. This is the core of a profound historical mystery. We have the names of their kings and cities, we can walk the stones of their fortresses, but their own words, their poetry, their laws, and their daily thoughts are locked behind a door for which we have lost the key. The Illyrian language stands as one of Europe's great linguistic puzzles. We know it existed, we know it was a member of the vast Indo-European family, but it survives only in fragments like scattered pieces of a shattered mosaic. Our main sources are what linguists call onomastics, the study of names. We have place names that endured, like Skodra or Lyssus, and personal names recorded by Greek and Roman historians, such as Teuta or Gentius. Beyond that, we have a handful of glosses, single words recorded by ancient Greek writers who defined them as Illyrian. It is a maddeningly sparse vocabulary list from a whole civilization. So how do experts even begin to approach such a void? They become linguistic detectives, using a method called comparative analysis. They take those few known Illyrian words and names and carefully compare their sounds and structures to other ancient Indo-European languages from the region, like Thracian to the east, or to ancient Greek and Latin. Most intriguingly, they look at modern Albanian. There is a long-standing and complex hypothesis that Albanian, a unique language branch in Europe, may be a direct, evolved descendant of ancient Illyrian. If this connection holds, it would mean the language was never fully erased. It simply transformed over 2,000 years, surviving in the speech of mountain communities despite every political upheaval. By analyzing the roots of Albanian words, linguists can sometimes make educated guesses about what an ancient Illyrian root might have meant. It is a process of looking at the shadow cast by a missing object to guess its shape. This linguistic mystery extends beyond the Adriatic coast. In the heel of Italy, in the region of Apulia, ancient inscriptions have been found in a language scholars call Mesapic. The script is derived from Greek, but the language itself is not. Some of the words and grammatical features show striking similarities to the little we know of Illyrian. This sparks a fierce debate. Was Mesapic a dialect of Illyrian, carried across the sea by migrating tribes in the early Iron Age? If so, it would dramatically expand our understanding of Illyrian influence and movement, suggesting a cultural network that stretched from the Balkans into southern Italy long before Rome rose to power. But without a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone for this culture, the connection remains a compelling theory rather than a proven fact. The consequence of this silence is profound. Because we cannot read their own records, we are forced to view this civilization almost entirely through the eyes of its enemies and conquerors. We see their actions as described by Greek colonists and Roman generals, but we cannot hear their reasons, their diplomacy, their songs, or their stories in their own voice. This linguistic void is not a natural accident of time. It is a direct result of the Roman Erasure protocol. By dismantling the institutions that would have produced and preserved literature and official documents, Rome ensured that the internal narrative of this people would be permanently muted. When words fail, we must turn to what they left behind that speaks without speech, to the physical artifacts that carried both practical value and symbolic power, like the coins that circulated from their mints to the wider world. A silver coin glimmers, its surface worn smooth by countless hands over centuries. On one side, the stern, clean-shaven profile of a man gazes into eternity, circled by Greek letters that spell his title and name, Basilios Balagiou of King Balagos. On the reverse, two stags stand alert, their antlers proud. This small piece of metal is more than currency. It is a sovereign statement, an unsanctioned autobiography of a kingdom that refused to be silent. While the Romans sought to scrape names from stone, they could not recall every coin already buried in hoards or lost in trade. These coins now speak from the earth, telling a secret history the conquerors could not fully erase. Each design was a deliberate message. The twin stags symbolized a connection to the natural world and perhaps a specific royal house. A cornucopia, or horn of plenty, stamped on other issues, broadcasted prosperity and agricultural bounty. Most telling of all is the image of a swift warship, a Lembus cutting through waves. This was a declaration of naval power and control over the Adriatic Sea, a boast minted in silver for friend and foe alike. Compare this to what came after. Once the Roman province of Illyricum was established, the mints in cities like Dyrrhachium or Apollonia kept operating, but the message changed utterly. The portraits of local kings vanished, replaced by the stern faces of Roman emperors like Augustus or Tiberius. The stags and ships were swapped for the eagle of Jupiter, the she-wolf of Rome, or the goddess Roma herself. The metal was still valuable, but the story it told was now exclusively a Roman one. This shift is the essence of numismatics, the study of coins, which functions as a brilliant detective tool for historians. The very quality of the silver reveals an economic truth. The early royal coins are often of high, consistent purity, indicating access to rich mines, likely in the interior mountains, and a stable, centralized authority that guaranteed their value. Furthermore, where these coins are found paints a map of forgotten connections. Illyrian silver has been discovered in hoards in southern Italy, in marketplaces in ancient Greece, and along river valleys deep into the Balkans. This distribution charters a vibrant trade network, proving this kingdom was an active economic hub, not an isolated backwater. As numismatist Dr. Sarah Chen explains, a coin is a contract of trust between a state and its people, and the widespread acceptance of these royal issues shows a sophisticated, functioning economy that Rome was determined to absorb and control. The wars were not merely about territory or pride. They were about securing this economic engine, about redirecting the flow of Adriatic timber, Balkan silver, and duty-free trade directly into the Roman treasury. The coins are tiny, stubborn witnesses to the wealth that made this empire a rival worth destroying. The sheer weight of history is felt in your feet here, climbing the worn steps of a city that clings defiantly to a mountainside. This is Biles, or perhaps Antigonaia, where the wind carries whispers from a time when these stones were not ruins but ramparts. The first thing that strikes you is the wall itself, a colossal jigsaw puzzle of polygonal limestone blocks, each one weighing several tons, fitted together without mortar. The ancient Greeks called this Cyclopean masonry, believing only mythical giants could have lifted such stones. To walk beside it is to feel small, to understand that this was an architecture of permanence and power, a statement carved from the very bones of the land. From a bird's eye view, the strategic genius becomes breathtakingly clear. These cities were not placed for convenience but for absolute command. They crown high plateaus, their backs to impassable cliffs, their gaze sweeping over fertile river valleys, and the only viable mountain passes for miles. Controlling these choke points meant controlling the movement of people, armies, and wealth across the entire region. This was a landscape engineered for security and sovereignty. Step inside the walls and a more complex society emerges from the foundations. You can trace the outline of a bouleuterion, a council house with tiered seating, its form borrowed from the Greek world. This shows an elite class engaged in the political theater of the Mediterranean, debating and administering laws, but look closer at the city's skeleton. The residential districts are not laid out in the strict, uniform grid of a Roman military town. Instead, neighborhoods cluster organically with smaller, interconnected homes and shared courtyards. This suggests a social organization less about imposed order and more about kinship groups or community ties, a distinct local identity expressed through urban planning. Even their military architecture had unique signatures. The gates to these fortresses were often designed with intricate, overlapping walls, creating deadly funnels where attackers could be trapped and assailed from three sides. This was a sophisticated, layered approach to defense, different from the straightforward, towering walls of a Greek polis or the standardized, regimented camps of a Roman legion. These fortresses of stone are silent, stubborn witnesses. They tell us of a people who invested immense communal effort into collective security, who valued urban life and local governance, and who engineered their environment with a masterful understanding of terrain. Their very durability, however, presented Rome with a unique problem after conquest. You could defeat an army, but how do you defeat a mountain? How do you erase a city built to withstand centuries? The answer lay not in further destruction, but in a more insidious and clever strategy of overlay and absorption, a systematic makeover that would seek to drain these mighty stones of their old meaning and fill them with a new Roman purpose. Rome's solution was a masterclass in bureaucratic conquest. The defeated kingdom did not merely vanish in a cloud of dust after its final battle. It was systematically dismantled and reassembled into a new Roman entity, the province of Illyricum. This was not an act of neglect, but of deliberate replacement. Rome understood that to prevent the spirit of the old kingdom from ever rising again, they had to erase the very structures that held its society together and implant their own in its place. The first and most visible tool was the road. Imagine the ancient network of mountain trails and coastal paths used for generations by local herders and traders. Now, Roman engineers arrive with their measuring tools and legions of labor, laying down the Via Egnatia. This was not a road built for the convenience of the local communities. It was a military and economic artery, a stark, straight line of stone and gravel designed for one purpose: to move Roman troops at speed from the Adriatic coast all the way to Byzantium, and to funnel the wealth of the East back to Italy. It literally paved over the old, meandering trails, imposing a new, rigid order on the landscape and ensuring that all movement, all trade, now flowed according to Rome's design. Next came the colonists, in strategic locations like the fertile valley near the modern town of Vid in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Rome established coloniae, settlements for retired legionaries. Take the colony at Nerona. Here, veterans who had served their 25 years were granted parcels of land as their pension. This land, of course, was not empty. It was taken, reassigned from local families who had worked it for centuries. These retired soldiers built their homes, their temples to Jupiter and Mars, and their forums in the familiar Roman style. They created insular, Latin-speaking communities that were loyal only to Rome, physically displacing the existing population and creating permanent pockets of imperial culture right in the heart of the conquered territory. It was a demographic transplant, changing the face of the land itself. We can see the full transformation in the story of a single city. On the coast stood Epidamnus, a venerable Greek colony that had once been a wary ally of the Illyrian kings. After the conquest, Rome refounded it, giving it a new name, Dyrrhachium. Under Roman management, its entire purpose shifted. The old Greek agora, the center of civic life, was overshadowed by a massive new Roman forum. Its excellent harbor was no longer just a local asset. It became a critical military and commercial hub, the main jumping-off point for anyone traveling from Italy to the eastern provinces. The city's identity was rewritten, its history as a node in the old kingdom's network deliberately obscured beneath its new role as a cog in the Roman machine. This comprehensive structural overhaul, from roads to colonies to cities, was devastatingly effective. It made the old political and economic systems of the kingdom not just defeated, but functionally obsolete. The stage was now set for the most profound chapter of all, the quiet, daily story of the people themselves, faced with an impossible choice: disappear into the new system, or find a way to keep the old world alive in secret. But for the farmer tending his goats in the highlands, or the potter shaping clay by a river, the fall of a kingdom was not a single event. It was a slow, creeping change in the fabric of daily life. The grand strategies of emperors and governors filtered down to a simple, brutal choice. You could join the new world, or you could find a way to live beside it, keeping the old one alive in the shadows. For many, especially among the local elite, the path was clear and pragmatic. To gain influence, to secure wealth and legal rights for their families, they learned Latin. They traded their traditional tunics for the Roman toga when conducting business in the new forums. They might even earn the coveted prize of Roman citizenship, a legal transformation that came with a new Roman name, effectively burying their ancestral identity under a layer of imperial privilege. In public inscriptions, these men proudly listed their Roman titles, their loyalty to the distant emperor set in stone for all to see. This was not necessarily betrayal, it was survival and ambition in a world that had been permanently rearranged. Yet in the private sphere, away from the eyes of Roman officials, a different story was being told. This is where we see the quiet, stubborn persistence of a culture refusing to die. Take something as personal as jewelry. Archaeologists find beautiful pieces from this era that show a fascinating blend. A bronze fibula, a cloak pin, might use a Roman clasp mechanism, but its decorative surface is etched with intricate, swirling spirals and geometric patterns that are distinctly, unmistakably local. These are the same designs found on pottery fragments from centuries before the Romans ever arrived. While the fine dinnerware for showing off to guests might be imported Italian red gloss terra sigillata, the everyday cooking pots, the bowls used within the family home, often continued to be handmade in the old styles, bearing the fingerprints of a tradition passed down through generations. The most profound resistance was spiritual. While Roman temples to Jupiter and Minerva dominated the new city centers, up in the remote, cloud-wrapped mountains, people still journeyed to ancient sacred sites. At a spring considered holy for centuries, or within a grove of old trees, they would leave small offerings, clay figurines or simple coins, continuing rituals to their own gods, like the horseman Medorus or the goddess Prend. This practice did not stop with the arrival of Roman gods, and it often persisted even after Christianity became the official religion centuries later. The church might be built in the valley, but the old beliefs clung to the high places, a private understanding between a people and their land. So we have to ask a personal question. If the price of safety and success was to perform a new identity in the town square, what traditions would you safeguard behind your own closed door? What song would you sing only to your children? What story would you tell only by the hearth fire? This cultural duality created a layered society, a people who were outwardly Roman but inwardly something much older and more complex. And this very complexity, this ghost of a former world living inside the Roman shell, began to leave its own faint imprint on the empire itself, in ways Rome would never officially acknowledge. The very ships that once challenged Rome's navy eventually sailed under its banner. The swift, lightweight Lembus, perfected by Illyrian sailors for raiding and maneuvering in the coastal shallows, proved too effective to ignore. Roman naval architects quietly adopted the design, adapting it for their own fleets, a practical admission that their erased rivals had mastered the Adriatic long before they had. This unacknowledged borrowing is a small but telling clue that erasure was never a complete process. A deeper, more profound ghost emerged centuries later from the very soil of the province they had created. Look at the line of Roman emperors from the turbulent 3rd and 4th centuries, men who pulled the empire back from the brink of collapse. Diocletian, who restructured the entire government. Constantine the Great, who embraced Christianity. Both were hailed from Illyricum, part of a whole cotter of so-called Illyrian emperors known for their military discipline and no-nonsense frontier toughness. They were officially Romans, but their families had lived in that landscape for generations, among the ruins of old fortresses and the memories that outlast stone. Were they descendants of those assimilated local elites, their ancestral legacy of independence and martial prowess now channeled into saving the empire that had consumed their homeland? It is a compelling thought. Their hard-edged, pragmatic style of rule, forged on a borderland that had always known conflict, may well have been the final, ironic gift of the kingdom Rome tried to destroy. Even the realm of myth holds traces. The ancient Greek tale of Cadmus and Harmonia, the legendary founders of Thebes, concludes not in Greece but in Illyria. After a life of sorrow, they are transformed into serpents and sent to rule over a distant western land. Could this strange epilogue be a fragmented, poetic memory from Greek colonists, a mythic encoding of a powerful and ancient dynasty they encountered on that coast? These subtle echoes create a fascinating paradox. In its campaign to obliterate a rival, Rome did not simply erase. It absorbed, it adapted, and was, in turn, unconsciously shaped by the very culture it sought to delete. The ghost of the forgotten empire lingered, not in rebellion, but in the foundations of the world that replaced it. To find more tangible remnants, we must become detectives, joining the modern scholars who are piecing this puzzle back together from the earth itself. The ghost of the empire finally began to take solid form in the 19th century, not through ancient texts, but through the trowels and notebooks of determined explorers. This modern resurrection started with romantic antiquarians, often diplomats or soldiers stationed in the crumbling Ottoman Empire, who puzzled over the massive, overgrown stone walls they found in the Balkan hills. One pivotal figure was the Austrian archaeologist Karl Patsch, who in the late 1800s meticulously documented thousands of inscriptions and sites, creating the first real framework for understanding the region's layered past. His work was later built upon by native scholars like the Albanian historian Hasan Seker, whose lifelong study of Illyrian archaeology was itself an act of cultural reclamation, a search for roots in a landscape where history had been written by outsiders. The true breakthrough, the kind of eureka, a moment every archaeologist dreams of, came at a place called Selka-e Poshtmi. Here, high in the mountains of modern Albania, researchers uncovered a necropolis of monumental royal tombs carved directly into the living rock. Inside, they found not just treasure but identity. There were weapons, intricate gold ornaments, and those distinct, crested bronze helmets placed as offerings for the afterlife. This was not a burial of a tribal chieftain, but of a king, a leader of a complex and wealthy society. Each artifact pulled from the earth was a direct rebuttal to the Roman narrative of primitive brigands. Yet, the work of these archaeological detectives is incredibly difficult. The region has faced political instability and chronic underfunding for research. The physical challenge is even more daunting. The past here is not neatly layered like a cake, but violently scrambled. A single site might have an Illyrian fortress foundation, a Roman forum built atop it, a Byzantine church in the corner, and an Ottoman-era farmhouse using stones from all three. Untangling this knot requires patience and precision. It is like trying to reconstruct a burned library from a handful of charred pages that have been reused as scrap paper for centuries. Through digital reconstruction, we can now peel those layers back, transforming a jumble of stones on a hillside into a vision of a proud, fortified city. This painstaking work is more than just scholarship, it is an act of historical justice. Archaeologists are gathering the pieces of a puzzle that Rome deliberately scattered, and with each new find, they are redrawing the maps of the ancient world, restoring a forgotten capital to its rightful place. One of the most powerful pieces of that puzzle is a single, recurring artifact that seems to embody the spirit of this lost kingdom. Those distinctive helmets from the royal tombs are not just grave goods, they are a fourth clue, a persistent enigma that speaks volumes. When you see one up close, you understand immediately it is something apart. It lacks the full face coverage of a classic Greek Corinthian helmet, and it is far more ornate than the simple, bowl-like Roman helmets of the same era. Crafted from bronze, it often features a high, crested crown, elaborate cheek guards that curve gracefully, and sometimes even intricate embossed patterns around the edges. This is not imported, nor is it a cheap imitation. It is a statement of local identity forged in metal, The very existence of these helmets tells a story of advanced technical skill. Creating such a piece required master metalworkers who could smelt copper and tin, cast the basic form, and then painstakingly hammer it into shape on an anvil, a process known as cold working. A museum conservator might point out the specific alloy composition, noting how the balance of metals was adjusted for the perfect blend of strength to protect and malleability to shape, a sign of generations of accumulated craftsmanship. But these objects were not made for parade. Examination under magnification reveals tiny scratches, dents, and repair marks. The wear patterns around the cheek pieces and the brow tell a silent story of actual use, of a helmet worn in training, in patrols, and in the chaos of battle. They were the prized possessions of a warrior elite, a class of individuals whose status and authority were literally bound up in their role as defenders of the kingdom. This was a society organized around capable, well-equipped military strength, not a scattered band of raiders. Perhaps most telling is where these helmets have turned up. While concentrated in the core lands of the kingdom, examples have been found as far away as the Italian peninsula. This distribution is a tiny, metallic echo of a larger story. Were these helmets carried by Illyrian mercenaries fighting for pay in foreign wars, a testament to their reputation as formidable soldiers? Or were they traded as prestigious objects, symbols of martial virtue that a foreign chieftain might wish to own? Either possibility paints a picture of a culture deeply connected to and influential within the wider Mediterranean world, its warriors moving along the same networks as goods and ideas. Every time one of these helmets is lifted from the earth, it is a direct rebuttal. It contradicts the Roman portrayal of a primitive, disorganized foe. Here, instead, is evidence of a sophisticated martial tradition, a society that valued and invested in the tools of war and produced soldiers who were the equals of any in the ancient world. This tangible proof of their military ethos forces us to ask a deeper, more personal question about the people who wore them. If this was their armor, what was the name of the nation they fought for? That helmet was worn by a warrior, but what was the name of the homeland he fought to defend? This is perhaps the most haunting silence in the entire story. We know them by the label Rome gave them, Illyrians, but that was a broad, impersonal term, a geographical catch-all for many different tribes across a vast region. It would be like calling everyone living between the Rhine and the Danube simply Germanic, erasing the distinct identities of the Franks, the Saxons, or the Goths. So what did their own kingdom call itself? When their kings issued decrees, when their scribes recorded treaties, what title headed the document? The evidence is frustratingly thin. Historians often refer to the Ardean kingdom, named for the ruling tribe under kings like Agron and Gentius. But was that its official name, or just a convenient way for outsiders to describe the dominant power? It might have been something more formal, like the Kingdom of the Illyrians, a declaration of unified sovereignty over many groups. Or, more likely, it possessed a native name that has been completely lost to us, a word that resonated with meaning for its people, but was never written down in a surviving text of their own. We catch fleeting glimpses of their language in fragments. The name Teuta, for instance, is thought to derive from a word, Teutana, which might have meant queen or leader of the people. Even the term Illyrian itself might be a Greek adaptation of a name these people used for themselves, perhaps something close to Illyrioi, which over centuries of Greek and Roman pronunciation became smoothed into the familiar term. This search for a true name is far more than academic. It is symbolic of the entire recovery project. Rome did not just conquer a political entity, it systematically stripped that entity of its specific sovereign identity. By denying it a unique name in the historical record, by subsuming it under a vague regional category, Rome made its erasure more complete. A kingdom without its own name is easier to forget, its accomplishments easier to attribute to others or to dismiss entirely. Restoring that name, or at least confronting its absence, is an act of historical justice. It is an acknowledgement that this was not just a collection of tribes, but a conscious, organized state with a sense of self. And if we are to understand that sense of self, we must look beyond politics and battlefields to the spiritual beliefs that anchored their world and survived long after their kingdom fell. A name gives identity, but faith provides a soul. To understand the people Rome sought to erase, we must step into their sacred spaces, into the quiet groves and mountain clearings where they connected with the divine. Imagine not a grand marble temple, but a natural sanctuary, a high place ringed with stones, where the wind carries whispers between earth and sky. These were the settings for a spiritual world we can only reconstruct from scattered clues, a puzzle where every piece is a glimpse into how they saw the universe and their place within it. We know the names of some of their gods, preserved like faint echoes in inscriptions left on stone. There was Medorus, a powerful horseman god, a deity of war and protection, often shown with a spear. There was En, a name that appears in dedications and might have been a supreme creator figure. And there were goddesses like Prend, associated with love and light, and Anzotica, linked to the sea and navigation. These were not mere copies of Greek or Roman gods, but distinct beings with their own stories and domains, reflecting the values and environment of their worshippers. The god of war was a cavalryman suited to their style of combat. The goddess of love bore a local name that spoke to their own language and traditions. Their beliefs extended beyond life as well. Archaeologists have uncovered tumulus burials, large earthen mounds covering stone-lined graves. Within these resting places, they placed gifts for the journey, pottery, weapons, jewelry, and personal ornaments. This practice suggests a firm belief in an afterlife, a world beyond where the individual would need these familiar and valuable items. It was a spiritual contract between the living and the departed, a sign of respect and continuity that bound the community together across generations. Then came Rome, and with it, a sophisticated strategy for spiritual conquest. It was rarely a matter of outright banning local gods. Instead, the Romans employed a policy scholars call interpretatio Romana, the Roman interpretation. This was a clever, almost diplomatic form of cultural takeover. They would identify a local deity, study its attributes, and simply declare it to be a local manifestation of a Roman god. Your powerful horseman god Medorus, they would announce, is actually our god Mars, just worshipped under a different name here. Prend became Venus, En might be linked to Jupiter. On the surface, this allowed worship to continue. People could still visit their sacred sites and offer prayers, but the context was utterly changed. The stories, the specific rituals, the unique relationship between the god and the land were slowly stripped away and replaced with Roman mythology and state-sanctioned ceremony. The spiritual landscape was remapped with Roman names, severing the direct, ancient link between the people and their divine protectors. It was a quiet, bureaucratic erasure of the soul. Yet the tenacity of spiritual memory is astonishing. Even as the Roman Empire itself faded and Christianity spread across the region, echoes of these old gods persisted. The name of Saint Prendi, for example, appears in later Christian contexts in Albania, a clear linguistic carryover from the goddess Prend. This survival hints at a profound truth that faith, woven into the fabric of daily life and language, can outlast empires. The stones of their sanctuaries might have been repurposed, but the whispers of their beliefs lingered in the very words people used, a silent, enduring resistance to total erasure. This deep-rooted connection to land and identity through spirit makes us wonder what fueled the society that practiced these beliefs. What was the economic engine that allowed this kingdom to thrive and ultimately draw the fatal attention of Rome? The Adriatic Sea was not a barrier, but a bridge, a bustling ancient highway where wealth and ambition sailed side by side. To label the kingdom that dominated these waters as merely pirates is to misunderstand the entire economic landscape of the era. They were, in essence, the masters of a maritime corridor, the strategic toll booth operators on one of the Mediterranean's most vital passages. Their power was built on a foundation of rich, natural resources. From their dense forests came the high-quality timber that was the lifeblood of ancient shipbuilding, not just for their own famous Lembus, but likely for markets across the sea. Their mountains held veins of silver, a source of coinage and prestige. The coastal pans produced salt, an essential commodity for preserving food, and from conflicts came captives, who entered the grim but ubiquitous ancient system of servitude. In return, their ports received the finer things that signaled status and connection to the wider Hellenistic world: beautiful painted pottery from Athens, amphorae filled with Greek wine, and precious olive oil. Picture an animated map in your mind, tracing lines across the blue. From the Italian coast, ships carried metals and manufactured goods eastward. From Greece and beyond, vessels brought luxury items and spices north. And from the Balkan interior, caravans brought goods down to the coast. All these routes converged in the territory controlled by this kingdom. Their network of coastal fortresses and sheltered harbors gave them the power to monitor, and if they chose, to intercept this constant flow. This brings us to the complex economics of their so-called piracy. Modern historians often reframe it as state-sponsored privateering. When a merchant ship from a rival city-state sailed past without permission or payment, its seizure was less a random act of banditry and more an informal tariff, a forceful assertion of control over what they viewed as their territorial waters. It was a way to levy taxes on trade that bypassed their authority and to redirect valuable cargoes to their own markets. This model generated tremendous wealth, financing their royal courts, their fortifications, and their formidable navy. That very prosperity, however, is what painted a target on their back for the expanding Roman Republic. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, Rome's interests were increasingly turning eastward. The security of grain shipments from Egypt and the ability to move troops and taxes between Italy and their growing interests in Greece became paramount. A powerful, independent kingdom controlling the narrow Strait of Otranto, the gateway between the Adriatic and Ionian seas, was an unacceptable risk. Rome could not tolerate a rival power that could at will strangle this crucial maritime lane. The conflict then was never truly about morality or a police action against lawlessness. It was a clash of economic imperatives. Rome needed an open, secure sea lane it controlled. The kingdom's wealth and power depended on maintaining its privileged, controlling position over that same waterway. Their economic success was the very root of their geopolitical downfall, making confrontation with Rome not a possibility, but an inevitability. This collision of ambitions reshaped the entire region, but the removal of such a significant power from the board had consequences that rippled far beyond the immediate aftermath of conquest. The fall of the kingdom did not bring peace to the shores it once ruled. Instead, it created a power vacuum, a strategic opening that would echo for centuries. By dismantling this organized, centralized power, Rome eliminated a critical buffer state. The rugged mountains and valleys were no longer under the control of a single royal authority capable of mustering a coordinated defense. This left Rome's new province of Illyricum directly exposed to pressures from the north and east. Tribal confederations like the Dacians, and later the Goths, Huns, and Slavs during the Great Migrations, now faced a fractured frontier rather than a unified kingdom. The archaeological record suggests increased conflict and fortification in the following centuries, as Rome struggled to contain these new pressures along a vast and difficult border. One could argue that by removing this regional stabilizer, Rome inadvertently made the Balkan Peninsula a more volatile and contested space for generations, a corridor for invasion, and a constant drain on imperial resources. Centuries later, in the medieval period, we see fascinating resonances. The emergence of the medieval kingdom of Albania, and later the legendary 15-year resistance against the Ottoman Empire led by the warrior Prince Skanderbeg, can be viewed through this long lens. These were not simple revivals of an ancient state, but new political formations, yet they arose in the same geographic heartland, among peoples whose ancestors had weathered Roman assimilation. The themes are strikingly familiar: a fierce defense of mountainous terrain, a struggle for autonomy against a vast empire, and a powerful sense of distinct identity rooted in the land. While direct lineage is complex, the pattern of resistance in this specific region suggests a deep-seated cultural memory, a tradition of independence that may have been nurtured in the shadows of foreign rule. This legacy of layered identity extends right into the modern era. The 20th century conflicts and complex national narratives in the Balkans did not emerge from a vacuum. They are, in part, the result of this ancient palimpsest, where Roman, Byzantine, Slavic, and Ottoman influences were written over an original text that was never fully erased. The very question of historical origin and cultural continuity in the region remains a topic of profound significance and sometimes debate. The Roman policy of erasure and assimilation did not simply delete a kingdom. It set in motion a long and complicated process of identity formation, where the suppressed past constantly whispers beneath the surface of recorded history. When we look at a modern map of the Balkans, we are not just seeing lines drawn by recent treaties. We are seeing the ghostly imprint of ancient borders, forgotten alliances, and a silence that has shaped 1,000 years of story. This teaches us a crucial lesson: that when a culture is forcibly removed from the narrative, the aftermath is not an empty page, but a tangled web of consequences, a ripple effect that distorts every wave that follows. The words of the victors are not neutral history, they are a form of strategic literature. To find our fifth clue, we must read the Roman accounts not for what they say, but for what they omit. Take the historian Livy, writing his monumental history of Rome centuries after the wars were over. Describing the Illyrian forces, he consistently uses terms like brigands and savages. Their actions are framed as mere piracy, their political decisions reduced to primitive greed or treachery. There is no discussion of their diplomatic negotiations, their treaties with Macedon, their economic motivations for controlling the sea lanes. Their sophisticated urban centers, their minted coins, their complex fortifications, all of this is absent from Livy's narrative. He presents a conflict between civilization and chaos because that served Rome's story of destined expansion. This bias forces us to ask a haunting question: what voices are missing entirely? It is almost certain that King Gentius, at the height of his power in Skodra, would have employed a court historian. This individual would have recorded royal decrees, military victories, and the kingdom's own justification for its actions. That history, written in their own language, would have been the most precious artifact of all for understanding their worldview. And it is precisely the kind of document that Roman authorities, following their policy of erasure, would have sought out and destroyed first. The melting of silver coins is one thing, but the burning of books and scrolls is the true extinction of a perspective. Consider the profound imbalance this creates. Imagine if our only record of the Second World War came from the personal memoirs of a single general from one side. We would have a detailed account of troop movements and battle strategies, but we would lack any understanding of the other side's political aims, the experiences of civilians, the cultural context that fueled the conflict. Our view would be dangerously incomplete, shaped entirely by the agenda and limited viewpoint of the narrator. This is the exact situation we face with ancient Illyria. The Roman sources provide the skeleton of events, the dates and names of battles, but they strip the flesh, blood, and soul from their rivals. Therefore, the silence in the record is not an empty space, it is a loud and deliberate statement. Every time Livy dismisses a complex political entity as a band of pirates, he is telling us something crucial about Roman insecurity and propaganda. The gap between his simplistic portrayal and the archaeological evidence of a structured society is where the truth begins to emerge. Learning to listen for these silences, to question the flattering self-portrait of an empire, is the most important skill for any student of the past. It transforms history from a received story into a detective story, where the missing files are as significant as the ones that remain. But the story of a people is not written only in stone or parchment, it is inscribed within us. The most personal clue to this ancient mystery lies in the very cells of living populations across the Balkans today. Modern genetic science offers a powerful new lens, one that can look past the written records, past the burned libraries and renamed cities, to trace biological continuity across thousands of years. Researchers now use sophisticated analysis of Y chromosomes, passed from father to son, and autosomal DNA from both parents, to create a genetic map of human movement and settlement. These studies search for patterns that have endured since the Iron Age, the very time when the Illyrian kingdoms flourished. In remote mountain villages, communities that have remained relatively isolated for centuries can act as genetic time capsules. These populations, sometimes called genetic isolates, may carry lineages that have seen minimal mixing with later migrating groups, preserving a stronger genetic signature of the region's earliest inhabitants. As geneticist Dr. Johannes Kroos has noted, DNA evidence can directly challenge simplistic historical narratives of complete population replacement. It asks a profound question: did the Roman conquest and subsequent waves of migration actually replace the people of this land, or did they largely remain, adapting to new rulers and cultures while maintaining a biological thread to their ancestors? The genetic distinctiveness of certain modern groups, particularly in areas that formed the heartland of the ancient kingdom, is a subject of intense study. For some, this persistent genetic profile is a living, breathing testament, written not in Latin or Greek, but in the language of biology. It suggests that the children of the erased empire were not wiped out, they were absorbed. The farmers who tilled the same valleys, the shepherds who guided their flocks through the same mountain passes, they carried forward a lineage that outlasted empires. This evidence transforms the mystery from an archaeological puzzle into something deeply human. It connects the silent stones of Biles or Skodra to the living communities that exist there now. The past is no longer a separate, distant country. It is a part of the present, carried in the bloodlines of millions. It proves that while an empire can dismantle a state and suppress a culture, it cannot so easily erase the people themselves. Their biological legacy endured, waiting for the science to tell their story in a way no conqueror could silence. Rome's campaign of forgetting was not a unique act of passion, but a calculated imperial policy. To understand the fate of our lost Adriatic kingdom, we must see it within a pattern, a chilling blueprint Rome applied to other formidable rivals. Each case reveals a different tool from the same kit of cultural erasure. Consider Carthage, Rome's most infamous rival. After the Third Punic War, the city was not merely defeated, it was methodically dismantled. The stories of the fields being sown with salt are likely legend, but the reality was stark enough. The city was burned, its surviving population sold into servitude, and the very territory was declared cursed ground. The goal was absolute annihilation, to ensure Carthage could never rise again. And yet, this very brutality cemented its place in history. Carthage's story, told through the vivid, hate-filled prose of Roman historians like Cotto, became legendary. We remember the name Hannibal as well as we remember Scipio. In this case, Rome's attempt to erase created an unforgettable ghost. then looked to the kingdom of Macedon, the legacy of Alexander the Great. After its defeat at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE, Rome did not salt the earth. Instead, it executed a political and cultural dissolution. The ancient kingdom was carved into 4 separate, powerless republics, forbidden from interacting with one another. The royal family was eradicated or taken to Rome. This was erasure through fragmentation, breaking a unified national identity into harmless, forgettable pieces. Yet again, the fame of Alexander and the sheer scale of Macedonian history proved too large to fully suppress. The kingdom faded, but its memory persisted as a glorious, bygone era. A third method is seen with the Etruscans, the sophisticated civilization that once dominated Italy before Rome. Here, Rome employed assimilation. Over centuries, the Etruscans were gradually absorbed. Their language faded, their religious practices were folded into Roman ritual, and their elite families became Roman senators. This was a slow, pervasive erasure, not by destruction but by embrace, until the vibrant Etruscan culture became a substratum, a foundation buried under Roman grandeur. We know them well today only because of their spectacular tombs, which Rome left undisturbed. So we have a comparative table of Roman strategy. For Carthage, the method was total physical destruction, with a high success level in practice, but a paradoxical failure in memory, as its story remains iconic. For Macedon, the method was political dismemberment, largely successful in ending the kingdom. Yet its historical prestige remains high. For the Etruscans, it was cultural assimilation, completely successful in ending their independent civilization, leaving them with a strong archaeological presence but a faint public memory. This brings us back to the Illyrian kingdom and its peculiar fate. It did not receive the legendary, hate-filled destruction of Carthage, which would have made it infamous. It lacked the world historical prestige of Macedon, which would have made it resilient. It was not fully assimilated like the Etruscans, whose artifacts were left in place to be rediscovered. Instead, it suffered a combination of these fates. It was militarily dismantled, politically dissolved, and its cultural markers were actively supplanted by Roman construction. But the crucial, silencing factor was the absence of its own voice. No Illyrian historian wrote a tragic epic of their defeat. No equivalent of Hannibal emerged as a singular, legendary foe for Roman writers to obsess over. The kingdom was simply written out of the grand narrative, rendered a peripheral footnote in Rome's march east. This made its erasure uniquely effective, not in destroying its people, but in severing its story from the mainstream of history. It became not a famous tragedy, but a quiet omission, a shadow that required a different kind of light to reveal. The glittering Greek cities along the coast presented a paradox to the inland kingdom. Apollonia and Epidamnus were not foreign implants but powerful neighbors, founded centuries earlier as beacons of Hellenic civilization. Their relationship with the Illyrian rulers was never simple, shifting between cautious trade, outright war, and delicate alliance depending on the decade. For the kingdom's elite, these colonies were irresistible portals to a wider, sophisticated world. Archaeological finds in royal tombs tell this story vividly. We discover fine black glazed drinking cups, ornate bronze vessels for mixing wine, and even silver coins minted in the Greek style bearing the names of Illyrian kings. These objects are more than imported luxury goods, they are evidence of adopted customs. The elite were hosting symposia, those formal Greek drinking parties that were as much about political networking and philosophical debate as they were about wine. By embracing this ritual, Illyrian nobles were signaling their place within the broader Mediterranean cultural sphere, using Greek customs to enhance their own prestige and legitimacy. Yet this cultural borrowing was not a sign of submission. The colonies were also strategic prizes and potential threats. A city like Epidamnus with its superb harbor was an economic jewel. Control it, and you controlled a major node in Adriatic trade. The kingdom did, for a time, exert direct control over several of these cities, not destroying them but harnessing their wealth and connections. This inevitably led to conflict with the colony's mother cities like Corinth, and drew the wary gaze of Rome, which saw itself as a protector of Greek interests. The Greek colonists, for their part, left the written records that form our primary window into this relationship, but their perspective is inherently skewed. They wrote of Illyrian kings as barbarian threats or, occasionally, as powerful patrons. Their histories filter every interaction through a lens of cultural superiority and self-interest. When they speak of piracy, we must ask if they mean banditry or a kingdom enforcing tolls on ships passing through its coastal waters. When they record a treaty, we must wonder what concessions the Illyrian king received that the Greek chronicler deemed unimportant to note. This Greek lens is invaluable, but it is a filter that tints everything it shows us. To find the true color of this lost kingdom, we must place their accounts beside the silent testimony of the artifacts and the imposing ruins of Illyrian fortresses looking down upon the coastal plains. It forces us to become historical detectives, triangulating a truth caught between Greek bias and the overwhelming silence Rome later imposed. The colonies were both bridges and battlegrounds, and through their complex story we see a kingdom actively engaging with the world, not isolated from it, strategically navigating a landscape of cultural influence and raw power long before Rome decided to redraw the map forever. Their military genius was etched into the very landscape they called home. While Rome perfected the art of the set-piece battle on open ground, this kingdom turned the rugged mountains and dense forests into a weapon. Their strength lay not in monolithic formations but in a decentralized, adaptable style of warfare that leveraged intimate knowledge of the terrain. Imagine a Roman legion, a masterpiece of disciplined engineering, marching along a narrow coastal path or into a steep valley. The air is still until a whistle cuts through it. From the cliffs above, a rain of light javelins called Sabina pelts down on the armored ranks. These were not meant to pierce shields in a volley, but to harass, to wound, to break cohesion. Before the Romans can properly form a defensive testudo, bands of warriors emerge from the tree line. They fight in loose groups, not a solid line, wielding the distinctive sika, a curved sword perfect for slashing in close, chaotic combat. Their goal was not to meet the Roman wall of shields head-on, but to splinter it, to draw sections of the legion out of position into ambushes where they could be surrounded. The Roman historian and strategist Frontinus, in his work Stratagems, preserved tales of their cunning. He recounts how Illyrian commanders would feign retreat, luring pursuing forces into prepared traps in the woods, or how they used controlled fires and misleading shouts in the night to simulate a larger army and panic Roman camps. This was a war of movement and deception, a stark contrast to the Roman ideal of direct, decisive confrontation. Beyond the battlefield, their entire society was structured for resilient defense. Scattered across the highlands were the Gradina, fortified hilltop refuges. When a Roman army advanced, the local population could retreat to these sheer-sided strongholds with their livestock and supplies, weathering a siege while guerrilla bands harried the invaders' supply lines from the surrounding hills. This strategy made conquest a tedious, costly process of reducing one mountain fortress after another, a nightmare for any logistical operation. Rome's eventual victory was not a simple matter of superior might crushing a primitive foe. It required adaptation, learning to fight in their enemy's environment, and ultimately, applying overwhelming resources to a prolonged campaign of subjugation. The fact that it took Rome multiple wars across decades to fully break this kingdom speaks volumes. Their tactical ingenuity forced the nascent Roman Empire to stretch and adapt, a reality that later chroniclers, eager to portray Rome's rise as inevitable and its foes as unworthy, worked very hard to minimize in the official story. But when written history turns against you, memory finds another way to speak. It whispers through stories told by firelight, in songs passed from grandmother to grandchild, in the strange and enduring creatures of local legend. Long after Rome scraped their names from stone, the spirit of this kingdom found refuge in myth. The ancient Greeks themselves told a puzzling tale about this very coast. After their many adventures, the legendary founder Cadmus and his wife Harmonia were said to have been transformed into serpents and sent by the gods to rule over Illyria. It is a bizarre, almost unsettling end to their saga. Why here? Scholars wonder if this strange myth preserves a distant, garbled memory of a very real and prestigious early dynasty in the region, a kernel of historical contact so significant it was woven into the grand tapestry of Greek storytelling, forever linking the land with the idea of sacred, serpentine royalty. Centuries later, in the medieval and modern folklore of the Balkans, the echoes continue. Epic songs and ballads sung by wandering bards often centered on themes of mountain kings, defiant queens, and heroic resistance against a powerful, encroaching empire. While the names and settings shifted with time, the core narratives of protecting autonomy, of cunning outsmarting brute force, feel hauntingly familiar. Then there are the supernatural beings that populate regional tales. Take the figure of the Cucud, a monstrous, undead creature of Albanian folklore. Some researchers see in this being a possible descendant of much older, pre-Roman pagan beliefs about spirits and the dead, a spectral fragment that survived the total conversion to Christianity. These stories were not kept in libraries that could be burned. They lived in the breath and memory of the people, an oral tradition that flowed around the dam of official Roman history. This was cultural memory in its most resilient form, a hidden current keeping a version of the past alive not through facts and dates, but through archetypes, emotions, and a deep sense of place. The stones may have been silenced, but the songs were not. So why does this matter? This story of a kingdom turned to dust and whispers, because it is far more than an ancient curiosity. It is a stark lesson written across 2,000 years. History is often presented as a single, unbroken story, a clear line from the past to the present. But what happens when that story is written by only one side? The tale of this erased empire reveals the profound danger of a single narrative. When we accept a history where only the victor has a voice, we lose the texture of human experience, the complexity of choice, and the very reasons conflicts unfold. We are left with a simplistic fable of civilization versus savagery, which explains nothing and justifies everything. This ancient act of erasure is a mirror held up to our own world, where cultural heritage and historical truth remain under threat from modern conflicts and ideological battles. Recovering these lost chapters is an urgent act of restoration. Think of our shared human past as a vast family album. For generations, someone has been carefully tearing out pages they didn't like, removing portraits of certain relatives and scribbling over their names. The album still exists, it still tells a story, but it is a lie by omission. The work of historians and archaeologists is to find those torn fragments, to piece them back together, and to restore every face and every name to its rightful place. This isn't about rewriting history out of spite. It is about writing it with integrity. By recovering this empire, we do more than add a footnote to Roman history. We restore agency to a people. We acknowledge their resilience, their innovations in shipbuilding and statecraft, their vibrant culture that refused to vanish entirely. We affirm a fundamental right, the right of all peoples to their own past, to the legacy of their ancestors, uncontaminated by the propaganda of their conquerors. Ultimately, this journey into silence teaches us how to listen. It trains us to be critical of the grand stories we inherit, to look not just at the words on the page, but at the empty spaces between them. It asks us to wonder in our own time whose voices are being muted, whose stories are being folded away, and what essential truths we might be missing because of it. The recovery of this forgotten rival is a testament to the fact that no erasure is ever truly complete. Memory, in some form, always endures, and in that endurance there is hope for a fuller, richer, and more honest understanding of who we are and where we come from. That whisper on a stone has grown into a reclaimed symphony. A civilization of warriors, traders, and rulers steps hesitantly back into the light, their story no longer a footnote in Rome's conquests but a powerful narrative in its own right. This journey reveals a fundamental truth we too often forget. History is not a passive record of events quietly waiting on a shelf. It is an active, often contentious conversation, a relentless tug of war between raw power and stubborn memory. We have witnessed how Rome did not merely defeat a rival kingdom on the battlefield. It launched a comprehensive campaign against its very legacy, attempting to scrub its achievements from the record and bury its identity under new roads and new gods. And yet, look at what survived. Through the patient work of archaeologists brushing dirt from Cyclopean walls, through linguists piecing together fragments of a lost language, through geneticists tracing ancient lineages in modern populations, and through a sheer human persistence to remember, that legacy refused to be extinguished. Their story endures. Let this be a powerful reminder to always look critically at the grand, sweeping narratives we inherit. Question the single story. Listen for the silences between the lines, for they often speak the loudest. If this journey into a shadowed past has reshaped your understanding of the ancient world, consider subscribing and ringing the bell. We delve deep into history's forgotten corners, bringing other obscured stories back into view. Now we turn the question to you. What other erased civilizations, what other silenced voices from our shared past do you believe are waiting patiently for their moment of rediscovery? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The conversation about who we are and where we come from is a story without an end, and your voice is now a part of it.